Hello, this is Alex Norman, otherwise known as Grandpa, and I've decided to develop a podcast. Why a podcast? Because I've been very fortunate in my life, and I've had a lot of good experiences. I've watched the development of technology, I've looked at the changes in society, in medicine, education. And at 94 years old, I'm still able to negotiate this thing called the internet and social media. I'm still actively writing books on my experiences and my observations. And living that long time, that period of life, gives you a different perspective on things that are happening. And there are two reasons I really want to do this. One, I didn't know my grandfather. My grandfather was killed by the Ku Klux Klan in 1898. And that means that I'm the grandson of enslaved Africans. My grandfather was the first free generation of Africans in the United States. And I am just the second generation of free Africans. So when you consider that I came from a life of poverty and now I'm living a life of wealth, I have some things that I hope that others would like to hear. So anyone who is interested in knowing about me or about the issues, or would like to discuss something with an old friend, I welcome you. One of the things that really has bothered me and has caused me to develop this podcast was I lived a life of activism as a civil rights worker, as a civil rights administrator, as a public policy practitioner, and my focus was all on social justice. And there's a story behind it that I'd like to share with you. I joined the Air Force in 1949 after graduating from high school. And a year later, the Korean War broke out, and I was sent to Japan in the occupation forces, and later to Korea with the United Nations forces. And one night, we were watching a movie. It was called The Next Voice You Hear. And it was by William Bendix, an old actor. And the theme of the movie was that the next voice you heard was going to be the voice of God. And God was very displeased about what was going on earth. And so all over the world, everyone heard in their own language the voice of God. And it was a warning. And it just stopped at that point. The next voice you hear. And there was nothing after that. And as I sat there with tears in my eyes, I vowed that if I could get out of Korea alive and intact physically, I would dedicate my life to the cause of social justice. And that's been my life. From that time, 1952, when I returned and was discharged, to the present. And as I'm not physically active, I thought I might use the platform of a podcast to express my activist ideas and to further my commitment of standing for social justice. And this is a time when we need more people to stand for social justice because so many people are fearful of reprisals or of intimidation or harm. And these are real. I lived in an authoritarian society for 31 years. I lived in the segregated South in Atlanta, Georgia, in Durham, North Carolina. I was active as a college student in the civil rights movement in Atlanta, Georgia, 1957 to 1959, and came to California in 1960 because of limited opportunities in Georgia. I had a master's degree in social work and couldn't find a job that was adequate in social work. Oh, I could get a factory job at Lockheed Aircraft, or I could get a job at the post office. But I didn't go to school and get a degree in social work to be a postal carrier or a factory worker. I wanted to be a professional. And so I came to California and continued my social activism to this date. So that's why Grandpa is on this podcast now. I hope that you will be with me as I discuss whatever issues one may bring up, and I hope to open this podcast to all who would want to have a discussion. No right, no wrong, no good, no bad, no judgment. Because I found that we really don't know anything. We have perceptions, we have observations, we have our experiences, but our lived experiences are not the same as others. We experience life differently. We perceive things differently, and they have a different impact upon us and our thinking. So I'm open to discussion. First thing is the current environment of white supremacy. I became very concerned about this in 2010 when I began to see the coalition of right-wing racist groups who had never cooperated with each other before beginning to cooperate with each other in a coalition of hate groups. And so I wrote a book in 2000 that was published in 2012. And it was called Black Leadership at the Crossroads. I called it the Crossroads because we were in the so-called post-civil rights era, but the civil rights era never really ended because even though we received the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which fully made us citizens, because previous to that, The Emancipation Proclamation, that was an executive order signed by President Lincoln, simply freed the slaves. It didn't make us citizens. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment attempted to correct that. But the reaction of the Ku Klux Klan, the Knights Columbus, and the Southern Compromise that allowed the very treasonous people who had fought against the Union to be elected to public office threw Black people back into the same pit that they were prior to the Civil War. So we have a really continuing struggle of seeking legal equality. And that was what my first book was about. My third or fourth book was about my activism, because along the way, at 89 years old, having completed a career as a professor at UCLA, as a consultant in organization development, as a public policy researcher, I contracted lung cancer. I contracted lung cancer. And I thought at that point, I was 89 years old. I'd achieved everything that I wanted to achieve in life and more. And so my concern was, well, maybe this is time for me to call it quits. So I brought my family together and I told them that I had this condition and that this may very well be the end for me, but that I had no fear and I had no regrets. Fortunate for me, and I was fortunate, because I was among the 20% of people who develop lung cancer and survive. And the next morning after the surgery, that's what Dr. Hari said to me. "You are very fortunate," he said. "We took the lobe out. It was cancerous. We took lymph nodes all around the lobe. You have no indication of cancer cells, and you don't need radiation or chemotherapy." And so he said, "The rest is up to you. We've done all that we can do, and now you have to heal." And with that, I had to learn to breathe all over again, because under the surgery, my lungs collapsed. And when your lungs collapse, they have to be reinflated. And I had to inflate them with my own breath. And it took quite a while. But I regained my strength, my stamina. I resumed biking. I was biking 25 miles on Fridays prior to that. And I continued to bike 25 miles on Friday. And I thought I was out of the danger, because for 3 years, I was increasing my stamina, increasing my strength. And then the cancer returned in a different place, but the same kind of cancer. And at that point, I thought, okay, I'm 92 years old. The life expectancy for African American men at that time was maybe 72, 73. So I was living on somebody else's time, and I figured, okay, that's it. I've done all that I need to do on this planet, and it's time for me to check out. My oncologist, Dr. Wong, told me that she could cure this. She said, I can cure this cancer. Given your biological and your physical conditioning, I can cure this. Because what she saw in my face was a resolve to end it, to let it run its course. In the next 2 years, she did exactly that. So today, after 8 months of immunotherapy, at the end of 8 months of immunotherapy, which lasted a year, I'm now cancer-free. Every CAT scan, every MRI I've taken, and I've taken 3 of them every 3 months. So for the last 9 months, I have been clear. And my thought is that I continue to live because my work isn't done on this planet. And I see this podcast as a part of that work. So here we go. What is happening now is that this authoritarian regime under President Trump would like to take us back to the 1950s when we had no civil rights and when authoritarianism ruled the earth and when white supremacy was a doctrine by which institutions in the United States operated. And now that white supremacy is bold and out front. And what President Trump has done has not been to create racism, not to create white supremacists, but to create the environment where white supremacy is normalized. And that's the threat that we face in this country. Sadly, we have chosen sides. We've chosen sides based on ideology, whether we are liberal or whether we are conservative, whether we're a Democrat, whether we're a Republican, whether we're libertarian, whether we're independent, or whether we're none of those. We've chosen to be in a camp where we see ourselves and then we see other. So what we need is what a friend of mine used to say, we need a bit of we-ness envy, that we need to come together and realize that there is but one race, and that is the human race, that we're all stardust, made from the explosions and the confusions and the infusions and the contortions of the planets and the collisions and the beginning of life that has evolved to what it is today. And that's why I believe I am continuing to breathe on this planet. And that is my purpose in life. And that as long as I am here, I have to adhere to that vow that I made in Korea, in that dugout, in that foxhole, that I would dedicate my life to peace and social justice. So that's who Grandpa is. He's an old man who is concerned about the status of today and the lack of willingness on the part of 1/3 of the population who is watching another third of the population denigrate the Constitution and punish another third of the population. So we need to activate that third of the population that's standing on the sidelines watching, because it doesn't involve them yet. So I'm hoping that one of the things or the benefits that I would see that to come out of what we're doing today is a kind of a tribunal, much like the Nuremberg trials, to look at the inhumane treatment that is coming out of this period and set up guidelines of accountability going forward. But beyond that, to hold those accountable who have caused the insurrection and the coup to advance as far as it has today. And so that is why I am here, to sound the clarion call for action, whatever action you can take. If you can participate in demonstrations and protests to give others the incentive and the motivation and the hope that protest matters, then protest. If you can contribute to organizations that are working for the humanity and the social justice of others, then contribute. If you can spend time in providing services to people who are in need, then provide those services. And if you have a voice that you can speak loudly, then speak loudly for those who can't speak for themselves. I'm hopeful that we will get through this. We have been through worse. Let me tell you, we have been through worse. I have lived through worse. I was a 13-year-old kid reading a newspaper in Georgia about the lynching that had occurred. Lynchings occurred often in the South in those days. And the Pittsburgh Courier, which was a Black national newspaper, was describing all of the lynchings that had taken place. And my mom walked by and saw me looking, and she said, "Junior, all white people aren't bad." Now, I want you to know that that struck me rather strange, because all that I knew about white people were the harm that they inflicted on Black people. So for her to say all white people weren't bad was cognitive dissonance, I think we call it. How could it be when all I see is what they're doing is bad? I would learn later, of course, that she was right. But it may seem that way now to some people, that everything that is happening now is bad and that all white people are bad. because they either participate in or condone or sit on the sidelines while mothers are being thrown to the ground, while children are being deported without their families, while everyone who looks brown or Latino or Black is being questioned as to their citizenship, their patriotism, their loyalty. But we will get through this. And when we do, I hope to be able to record the tribunal that brings to accountability the people who have caused this tragedy. And so that's the first of a discussion with Grandpa. And I hope to have another discussion following on which we look specifically at some issues. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.